morning, everybody. Welcome to a special edition of Inside Blue 360. As the nation is embroiled in civil unrest and a really wild discussion about the future of policing in America, we're going to be joined today by two very, very special guests. A lot of our audience doesn't need to be introduced to these people, but some might. So I'm going to be very, very happy to introduce these two friends of mine. First up will be retired Detective Michael O'Keefe. Michael O'Keefe is a retired first-grade detective of the NYPD. Had an exemplary career locking up violent criminals who were all over the city of New York back in the 80s and 90s. It was a different city at that time. Mike was part of the New York miracle that saved the city. In 1991, Mike, 1981?
92.
Mike was in the struggle of his life with a man named Kiko Garcia. Kiko Garcia was trying to kill Mike. Mike killed Kiko Garcia, and it kicked off very, very extensive rioting here in New York City. And we're going to talk about that with Mike in a little while. Mike is now an author, and we'll be talking about his books later on before we go. Our other guest is the former police commissioner of New York City, former corrections commissioner for New York City, former a lot of stuff. He's run a lot of things, been everywhere and done everything twice. Used to walk 42nd Street with me back in the 80s when it was completely different 42nd Street from the 42nd Street people know. It's really, really a pleasure to have my old friend, my old partner, and my old boss, Bernie Kerik on the show. Good morning, guys.
Sure. Thank you.
First of all, I'm really, really appreciative to have two heroes like you on our episode this morning. Well, the murder of George Floyd was an aberration. There's just no doubt about it. It's an aberration. It's not what that guy should have just been brought to jail and arrested. But in a country where there's 600,000, 700,000 cops and 330 million people, I don't think mathematically it's possible that you won't have either accidental deaths in custody or just rogue cops who kill people in custody. So we're either going to have to accept that as a society, or we're going to have to retreat from policing. Which way do you think it's going to go? Bern, we'll start with you.
So I think first of all, you have to look at the real numbers. You have about 328 million people in the U.S. You have about 10 million arrests per year. Right? Last year, 2019, about 10 million. Out of that 10 million, 650,000 of those were for violent crimes. So when you look at that overall number, right, you had 1,004 shootings of fatal shootings involving police. Out of that 1,004 number, out of 328 million people, out of that 1,004 number, you had, I think the number now, they've adjusted it, it's 50-something unarmed, 25 whites, 15 blacks. Those are real numbers. Those numbers are maintained by the Washington Post. The arrest numbers are maintained by the FBI Uniform Crime Index. When you look at that and position that against the argument that there's systematic racism and annihilation of blacks by police in black communities, it's a farce. It's a complete farce. Statistically, I don't even know what that number would be. 15 black men or blacks out of 10 million arrests and 1,004 shootings, 328 million people in the country. Statistically, where are we? It's not systematic for damn sure. So that's number one. But to get to your point, and I don't think there's anybody that would understand this on the police level. Today, I've been gone 19 years already, right? The cops that are working today weren't around when Michael O'Keefe was running in a war zone up in Washington Heights. They weren't around then. The cops today don't know what New York City was like back in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. But we do. We were there. The one thing that changed New York City in 1994, we got a Republican mayor that came in and basically said, look, nobody wants to live, visit, work, or go to school in a place where they're not safe. So the first and foremost thing we have to do is we have to reduce crime. For every percentage point we did, we saw increases in economic development, increases in real estate value, decreases in welfare rolls, decreases in poverty, and it created the Renaissance in New York. You guys were a part of it. Mike O'Keefe, before he gets on there talking, I can tell you, I knew him as a cop. I worked in the Heights in narcotics. Washington Heights, where he worked at the time, was a war zone. It was a war zone. It all changed from aggressive policing and leadership by a mayor that took control and made sure that the crime was reduced. So this goes to your question, Jer. You know, what's happening in these other cities and why all this complete anti-cop rhetoric? Here's the problem. Today, in the last 4 weeks, you had 175 people shot in Chicago. You don't have that in Baghdad. 175 people shot in Chicago in 4 weeks. Here's the problem. All this focus on George Floyd and all this focus on, this systematic racism and all this other stuff, it's not real. But what it is, it's a diversion from all these communities where the Democrats can't control their cities. Chicago, Baltimore, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, every single one of these cities that have the highest crime rates, the highest murder rates, they're all run by Democrats. None of them are run by Republicans. And I think that, especially in an election year right now, where people are looking at this stuff and saying, what is the real problem? They're trying to focus on George Floyd. George Floyd, as you said, was an aberration. The guy shouldn't have died. The cop, he murdered him. The end of story. Justice will be served, justice will be done. But at the end of the day, this ain't about George Floyd. It has nothing to do with George Floyd. And I don't think anybody would understand it or know it better than you, Mike, and other cops that were around then. And the cops of today probably don't get it, don't understand it. They never witnessed what was going on back in the old days.
Hey, Mike, in 92, when you had your shooting and Washington Heights was burning. It was extremely violent riots. And I'm guessing that some of the people that took, maybe even many of the people that took to the streets to protest really believed that you had done something terrible and they wanted to scream and yell and say that this was wrong. Tell us a little bit about how the drug dealing community of Washington Heights, and for to Bernie's point, a lot of our audience aren't going to know Washington Heights was like the crack capital of the United States in the early 90s. And the drug dealers were making hundreds of millions of dollars. And guys like Mike were crimping, guys like Mike who were making $35,000 a year were crimping their style, and they wanted to put a stop to it. They wanted the cops to go hands off. What did those drug dealers do when the protests started?
Well, just to clarify, Washington Heights wasn't just the crack capital of the world. It was the cocaine nexus for the entire, basically the whole country. The strategy in place at the time, and they had tried it on a lower level, was to get the police to back off allegations, and they were all the same. Allegations were coming in against individual cops who were making these arrests, and it was orchestrated by lawyers, defense attorneys, and there's a profit motive there. But when this shooting occurred, it didn't become a publicity matter until the mayor's office got involved. The first day, the morning that it happened, there was a 2-inch column in the newspaper, in the Daily News that said that there was a police involved shooting, gun recovered. That's all there was. And then the mayor got involved, and he got in front of the cameras, and he turned this all into a referendum on what was supposed to be police brutality. The drug cartel in Washington Heights now saw an opportunity. And because of the ridiculous allegations, now the streets flood with people who are angry because they don't understand. They're reacting emotionally, and they don't know the facts. And what's worse is you have a mayor's office that's putting out untruths for their own political agenda. The other thing that happened, and it was discovered later in the investigation, a lot of those rioters were paid to riot. So it was not a grassroots uprising. I got more mail from the neighborhood at the precinct in support in the aftermath of that than there were legitimate residents out on the street rioting.
I never knew that. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So,
hey, Jer, if I can,
please.
Something Mike just said is really interesting. And think about what happened. This is 1992. This is 1992 when this happened. Think about what's happening today versus what happened then. There was a column. There was an incident. This stuff was going on all the time. We had a bunch of cops hurt and killed up in the Heights. Michael Busick, Chris Hoban, and others that were shot and killed up there. And this was during those days, during that time. What does the mayor do? Once the mayor gets involved, the coddling of, the thugs, the villainizing of cops, that's what the mayor was doing. Mayor Dinkins paid for the funeral of Kiko Garcia, the drug dealer that tried to kill Mike. He paid for his funeral. Why? Why would you do that? These are the types of things that created this environment of unrest, and it's exactly what's happening today.
Is it possible that, and I believe this, that most of the people that go out to protest are pure of heart, but in a big crowd and in a big assembly of people, they get whipped up by a few who are not pure of heart, and then you now have, instead of dozens acting violently, you have hundreds acting violently. You think that's what's going on in the cities around the country?
With respect to the pure of heart argument, do they believe what they claim to believe? Yeah, I think they do. But that doesn't mean that they're not misled or deluded. It's a false narrative. There isn't systemic police racism.
No, I agree with you.
If you look in any major city and any metropolitan police department in the nation, walk into a precinct house. We're not white anymore, Jerry. We're everybody. We represent the community. It's ludicrous.
What's the phrase? It's a majority-minority job now. I think that's the phrase I hear all the time.
Jared, keep this in mind. And I think we saw this some in Mike's incident. We've seen it in other incidents. Think about the communities, the cops that work in a community. Say you walk into the 3-4 or the 3-3 precinct up in the Heights. Back then or today, there are cops in that precinct that know every single community leader in that community. They know them and they know them well. They have great relationships. That is the real community, right? When there's a problem, who do you go to? You go to those community leaders. And 99% of the time, between the cops and the real community leaders, you get it worked out. But here's the problem, especially today. What's going on today, there is a substantial undercurrent by Antifa, which is basically a Marxist, communist group. Black Lives Matter, which is a hate group. You've got an undercurrent formulated by these people to go into these communities and instill violence, engage in extreme violence, arson, looting, and everything else under the sun. We've seen, and I think the FBI is going to come out with some interesting findings where they're going to determine who's funding a lot of these operations. Think, 42 states, 72 cities, all of a sudden, Antifa is in every one. Black Lives Matter is in every one. There's bricks, there's stones, there's pavers being delivered to places, mysteriously delivered to downtown streets. So these kids, these looters come in, the rioters come in and wipe out complete neighborhoods. Who's doing that? You're talking tens of millions of dollars. This isn't community level stuff. This is other stuff. And there's this socialist communist push, just like there was back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panther Party, the FALN, the Weather Underground, all these groups, they're just like these groups today, except today they're far more dangerous because they have better communications. They have funding that those other groups never had. And I think this is something, I've asked the president to basically classify these groups as terror groups, just like we looked at the other groups back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They got to do that today too, because they are the ones stirring up the real communities, real community leaders. If we just had to deal with that, we'd be okay. But this other stuff is not that.
You mentioned the funding. The terror groups that you talked about, or the domestic terror groups that you talked about that operated in the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s, they would all do things like bank robberies to fund themselves because they had no money. Yeah. And there are no big bank robberies or anything like that going on now to fund them because they're getting their funding from someplace. They obviously also heard the clarion call when things jumped off in Minneapolis. Then all of a sudden, literally simultaneously, things jumped off everywhere. Right. Across the country, and now you see it even internationally. They're really our brothers and sisters over in England are getting their butts kicked on a daily basis over there. It's really
That's right. A number of European countries.
Really, I know about England. I didn't realize this happened in other European countries also. Man, yeah. And what is that all about? England is a place, for crying out loud, where like 90% of the cops are unarmed. It's like what's the problem? I don't get it, but if Bernie, I want to talk about Chauvin a little bit, and I want Mike and I spoke about Chauvin a little bit yesterday, and I want to speak about him a little bit. This was a guy who was a training officer. He had two rookies to throw these poor two rookies who had 5 days on the job between the two of them. They hadn't even spent a week on the job between the two of them. As a boss, as an executive, how do you get the Chauvins of your job? How do you find them and get them off? And what did Minneapolis miss somehow, I guess, and not mitigate this guy?
Well, Jared, look, it's all about leadership and management, and it kind of makes me laugh when you have the mayor stand up, the attorney general stand up, the governor stand up. They're all standing up and they're saying, "Oh, there's systemic problems within the department. There was no accountability. There was no this. There was no that." And they give this litany of bad things about the agency. Okay, you guys ran that. You ran that. So all that bad stuff that you're talking about, that didn't happen yesterday. That could be systemic things that was going on within the agency. And I hear everybody calling for, we want reform and we want more training and we want more, verbal judo and de-escalation training. You know what? I don't personally, I don't think cops, especially in New York City, they can't get any more training. They can't get any more training. What else are you going to do with them? If you have bad cops, if you have guys that have bad records, there are flagging mechanisms within internal affairs that flags guys that you should take a second look at. I had it at Rikers Island for correction officers. We had it in the NYPD, and I'm sure they've enhanced that stuff even more since I left. But at the end of the day, you know what? The departments, leaders, managers, executives, you got to take care of your department. You see stuff like that, deal with it administratively, or lock the guy up, one or the other. But don't stand up on a pedestal like you're completely invisible from the issue, talk for a half an hour how messed up and fucked up it is, and then come to realize it's been you in charge for the last 3 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years.
Yeah, so they're trying to push the accountability down to the police chief or maybe even lower in the agency. Who knows, right? And instead, they're sitting in the big chairs and they're trying to dodge it. Mike, you said something interesting to me yesterday. You thought that Chauvin was showing off for the rookies.
Well, no, I surmised it's the only motive I can come up with. I don't for the life of me understand why anyone would do such a thing. It doesn't serve a legitimate purpose. It's sadistic. Really is no other word for it. But even the rookie cops they want to get him out of there into the hospital, and Chauvin tells them, no, we're going to wait for an ambulance. Why? It hasn't come in 8 minutes. You have a medical emergency. Get him the hell out of there. And the only motive I can imagine is he was showing off for these rookie cops. It's the only thing I come up with. And obviously, I don't know his mind. I don't want to be in his mind, God forbid.
Yeah,
the problem that police suffer from now, we were a happier place when we didn't have cell phones and social media. We really were. Because the problem with policing is there are confrontations. And those confrontations have to be resolved forcibly. Force is violence. Violence is ugly in every manifestation. Justified or not, it's ugly. And as we know, every police encounter now is videoed. And with social media, those images are now saturating everybody's consciousness. Nobody ever takes the good stuff. When we save lives and deliver babies and rescue people from fires or interdict a gunfight to protect citizens. That stuff never ends up on social media. You don't see it. So I just don't know how to counter that. There has to be a way.
Well, I would hope that our leaders, and I know some are trying, but most are not, try to educate people that police work is sometimes difficult and necessary. But it seems like a lot of and I guess this is being played out, and I think, Bernie, you mentioned it earlier, because it's an election cycle, or if you didn't mention it, it's spinning in my head. Because it's an election cycle, everybody who's got a D after their name seems to be racing as far left as humanly possible. And it's going to be interesting to see how they're going to box Joe Biden in. I saw they booed the mayor of Minneapolis out of a rally because he wouldn't commit to defunding and abolishing his police department, because he recognizes, I guess, and that guy's a super liberal guy. He recognizes that that's folly. And so he wouldn't commit to it. And they literally forced him to leave, screaming and yelling at him. Well, it's not going to be that dramatic, but Biden's going to be boxed into the same corner. And, you know, there's just no way he's going to get out of it. Because if he says, no, we need police, he's going to be screamed and yelled at by his own people who are trying to race as far left as, you know, humanly possible. And it's a place that doesn't exist in the real world, I don't think.
You know, to your point, or both of you really, you know, the thing about the cell phones, watching what's going on, capturing what's going on, I think there's an education piece that we're missing here. And the education piece is for the general public. You know, when Eric Garner was killed in Staten Island, and he died, you know, the word, you know, that I got from everybody I spoke to, you know, they killed him over selling cigarettes, right? And what I try to explain to people, and I think this is where we lose a big part of the argument is, I don't care if he was selling cigarettes. I don't care if he stole a napkin or a scarf from somebody sitting at a counter in a restaurant, or he committed a manslaughter. Doesn't make any difference. Once he was told he was under arrest, then the officer is obligated by law to take him into custody. And when he attempts to do that and the guy resists, no matter what the crime is, once the guy resists, the officer has to use force to take him into custody, and the force necessary to get him there. The problem we have is politicians don't have the balls to stand up at a podium and say that. They just can't. It can't come out. They can't get it out. Why? I don't know. But at the end of the day, that was the difference between Rudy Giuliani or somebody like a Giuliani, maybe a former U.S. attorney, maybe somebody that worked in law enforcement, when you see those guys that wind up in political positions, they will stand up and tell you, well, I understand your concern. I understand what you're saying, and I understand why you think what you do. But here's the bottom line, and then get it out. They don't do that. 95% of the time, they basically appease the community and say, oh, yeah, it was wrong. There was too much force. It was overdone. And you have police chiefs that, I've seen all over the country within 10 minutes after the incident, look at a video without any other evidence and say, oh, absolutely should have never happened. Really? Well, you're a moron. Any executive, any police executive that does that is a complete idiot, because we all know that minuscule, like Mike was saying, that piece of tape is a minuscule part of the overall evidence that would go into a grand jury to determine what really happened. Yeah. And what they do is they crucify the cops, it crucifies the department, and it's a part of why, and how they villainize policing in this country.
Agreed. Mike, you went through a grand jury investigation. You were looked at by, any law enforcement agency you could imagine, looked at your shooting. First of all, Mike, how many gun collars did you make in your NYPD Det?
Over 300 loaded guns.
And generally,
taken off of people.
I know you were accused of executing the gentleman involved. You didn't generally go around and execute the other 300, did you?
No.
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 If you had
and with respect to the Garcia incident, I spent five full minutes getting the crap kicked out of myself, trying not to have to shoot him.
Right.
It became a gunfight when he made it one.
You were getting exhausted in that fight, weren't you?
If you've ever had a fight, if you've ever boxed and gone through a 3-minute round, you know how exhausting it is.
Yeah.
Imagine this is a physical fight where you're outweighed and outmatched, and it lasts 5 minutes. Exhaustion's not the word.
Yeah, and for the people that don't know Mike, Mike is in tremendously good physical shape and always has been. It wasn't like Mike was outmatched because he wasn't in the gym and taking care of himself and doing what he had to do. Garcia was a physically strong man and was willing to use violence against Mike.
He was also coked out of his mind.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Mike, you just wanted to arrest Garcia.
I saw him with a gun. I was trying to arrest him.
Right. You probably could have happily gone through your life without ever taking his life. Yeah, and yeah.
I wonder what my life would have been like if instead of looking to the right at 162nd Street in St. Nick, I looked to the left. What would have happened then?
Yeah, right. Who knows? But you know what? Maybe Garcia would have killed another cop. He tried to kill you. Maybe Garcia would have killed some other cop or some kid, or who knows what he would have done. So, Garcia had to be removed from society. Your goal was to put him in jail. He ended up, in a cemetery, courtesy of David Dinkins. He should have just been put on Hard Island. The future going forward, what do you think? I mean, I think we're going to have a bad turn for our police. I think this is a train. We're on the tracks. We're going to get hit by the train, but we're going to come out of it on the other end. How bad do you think it's going to get, and how long do you think it's going to last for those guys and gals out there that are doing the job?
Well, I think a couple things, Jared. Is it bad? Yes, it's bad. I think I'm encouraged by the Attorney General's investigation of Antifa and some of these other groups, these anarchist and Marxist groups that are trying to destabilize the country. That's extremely important right now, because otherwise the next time you have one of these events, and we're going to have them from time to time, but the next time you do, there'll be a replay of all this stuff. Maybe worse, maybe not, but they'll try. That's number one. Number two, I'd encourage every cop, know the law, know your department's policies, but don't be afraid to do your job. I'm watching videos. I saw a video the other day, 2 New York City cops being chased around a deli by a guy with a knife. I watched another guy in the protest smash a cop in the back of the head with a brick. It could have killed him. Cop pulls his gun, didn't fire. I've seen probably 10 different incidents where cops could have, and in my opinion, should have used deadly force. They cowered. They backed off because they're scared to death to do their job. If you're that afraid to do your job, I'd say get out of the job, because you're going to get hurt or you're going to get somebody else hurt. And I only say this from experience. I don't think, and I'll not to blow smoke up his ass while he's on the phone, on the thing here, but I'm going to tell you something. In the 90s, in the 80s and 90s, I don't think anybody watching this, unless you were there, would understand the extreme violence that was going on in Washington Heights. Michael O'Keefe, and there was a group of them in the 3-4 precinct that went around, took guns, locked really super bad guys up. There was a group of them in the 3-4. There was a group of them in the 3-2. I knew them all by name. I was in narcotics. We really didn't deal with anybody in the precincts. I was buying drugs all over Spanish Harlem, Washington Heights. But I knew these guys. I knew these teams of guys that went out there and did things that nobody else would have the balls to do. Even other cops. Other cops didn't have the balls to go out and do what they were doing. These are the kind of guys that we should be teaching the guys today. These are the kind of guys that we should be really training people today. I don't know what's happened to the training. I think they're overtrained. I think they're, I'm scared to death of what's going on in academies, because it looks like they're cowering to the people in the streets. If you're going to cower, if you're afraid, don't do the job. Get out. Go somewhere else. Go to sanitation or transportation or somewhere. Do something else. Otherwise, you're going to get killed, or you're going to get somebody killed. But I think in due time, and one last thing, Jerry, I think this social experiment with defunding the police, I'd really like to see it enacted in a couple places, and everybody sit back and watch what happens. Because what's going to happen?
No, I live in Brooklyn. Please.
No, I'm not saying Brooklyn, but I'm saying in other places,
Okay.
let it run its course, and then come back to me in 6 months. Come back to me in, I don't know, it won't take 6 months, 3 months. Come back to me and tell me how it went when somebody's busting into your house and there's a strong arm robbery, or whatever the case may be, and they send a social service worker. I don't even know who they're sending. They send somebody to go help you out. Let me know how that goes, and then they'll go back to normal.
Michael?
They're not sending anyone. They're sending thoughts and prayers. We kind of have we have an example in microcosm of what happens when you depolice an area because you're afraid of confrontation with the citizenry, and it's called South Chicago. That's what's going to happen if you remove order from society. The disorderly members, who are few in number, are going to exact a terrible, terrible toll. And this will go on for one election cycle. And then the grown-ups will take over again. Yeah. Hopefully we're not too far down the abyss for intelligent, reasonable, thoughtful solutions, as opposed to emotion, which everybody's operating on now. Emotion, by the way, that is being stoked by misinformation and lies.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Jared.
These are individual incidents. They need to be handled as individual incidents. And they need to be given the time to play out and be investigated, and allow the criminal justice system, which isn't a magic wand and it's not a snap of the fingers. It's a process, and you need to let it play out. It's what this country was based upon.
Yeah.
Equal protection under the law, but it also means equal responsibility under the law.
Agreed. We all have responsibilities as Americans. Agreed.
These cities are going to implode. They've been imploding, but I think it's only going to get worse. What happened to New York City? What did it take for the people of New York City to elect a Republican? It took the highest murder rate in the country's history. That's what it took. And it wasn't until then when people said, enough is enough. I don't care what party they're from anymore. We just need somebody that's going to instill law and order in the communities. And then Giuliani came into office. I hope they have the common sense to do that.
I have one more request from each of you, because both of you guys have shed your blood and cried your tears and sweated for the people out there, but both of you guys love cops as much as any two people I know. Can I have a message to the guys and gals who are holding the line out there from each of you?
I pray for them. Obviously, I want them to protect themselves. I don't, I wish I had a message of hope, but I don't. It's horrendous. New York City cops, they're at the mercy of a mayor who wants to throw them under the wheels of the bus. That's what he got elected for, to grind them up. I don't know what to say to them. I mean, as an American, I'm going to fight for them, and I'm going to fight on their behalf, and obviously I'm going to vote with people that are for law and order. But the situation they're in now, it's unenviable, and I wouldn't want to be in it.
Boss?
My thoughts and prayers go out to all of them. I would say stay strong. Follow your heart. Ignore the rhetoric for realistically the greatest police department in the world. Nobody knows that better than I do. I ran it 40 work for the best department in the entire world. Your problem right now is you have a coward for a leader. You have an anarchist for a leader. He's a communist. He is no different than one of the people that's pushing these riots in the city of New York. Eventually his time will come.
Well, thanks, guys. I'm going to ask you guys to stay on for a recap after we close out the show. It'll be off the air, of course. For our audience out there, this has been a real special episode for us. We're two of the greatest cops to ever wear the NYPD shield on our show today. I'd like to mention, for people that are still under quarantine, if you're still in phase one, well, hopefully you're not going to have a COVID rebound because of the demonstrations. But both of our guests today are authors, and I'd like to mention the books they've written. Mike O'Keefe has written 2 novels in the Patty Durr series. One is called Shot to Pieces, which is a bit of a biography or an autobiography, but it's actually a novel. And the other is A Reckoning in Brooklyn, and he has a collection of short stories he's published called 13 Stories. Bernie Kerik is the author of 2 nonfiction titles. One is called The Lost Son, My Life in Pursuit of Justice, and the other is From Jailer to Jailed, My Journey from Corrections and Police Commissioner to Inmate number 84888-054. And he's also written a novel called The Grave Above the Grave. I think Bernie had to jump off and go someplace else. So for Bernie Kerik and Mike O'Keefe and myself, thank you everybody for watching Inside Blue 360 or listening to Inside Blue 360. And for all the cops out there, watch your back, watch your partners, stay safe.